Welcome to the curator's corner of her murmuring library. If you'd like to hear my commentary in context, this is also at the end of chapter 9 of Alcott's Behind a Mask. But if you're curious to skip straight to the end for a little peek behind the curtain before listening, this is my spoilery commentary at the end of the book. What a story, huh? I've gotta say, in all the twists, I never thought Edward was really dead. But I also didn't expect him to turn up dragging Jean's entire life story behind him. The guy had time on his hands and heartbreak in his pocket, which, fair. And how about Sir John? Did you also forget about him by chapter 6? I completely did. I really thought he was the distant backup plan right up to the point when we read Jean's scathing letters. And turns out he was her prize all along. Well, him and a side of slightly more vicious than petty revenge. Apparently best served cold and drenched in the tears of her enemies. Anyway, Sir John. And actually, somehow, that turned out kind of sweet, right? I mean, don't get me wrong. Every time he calls her my child and little, I'm grateful I don't have to edit out my visible cringe. But then I remind myself they're both consenting adults. Their age play kink is none of my business. And it works for them in the end. There's that part in chapter 7 where they're talking about the vows they're offering, the promises they're making each other, and Alcott writes, "He promised all that she asked and kept that promise to the end." And then about Jean, she writes that Jean promised what she faithfully performed in after years. So beyond him getting a 19-year-old bride and her getting a aristocrat title, the author confirms that they work together faithfully, protectively, and happily for the rest of his life. And despite my initial doubts, I kind of love that for them, especially after everything. I also really love how Alcott writes Jean through this whole story. We don't get a lot of stories, especially from this period, where women can be clever and successful without becoming villains or victims of the plot. So it is really fascinating to see a woman succeed on the strength of her wit, will, and unabashed manipulation of the system. And I think this happens because at its heart, this isn't a story about the characters. I think it's a story about the systems of gender and class and the ways those systems disadvantage every single character in this story. Hear me out on this one. Jean's experience is obviously the plot of the book, but look at the rest of them. Mrs. Coventry. She has some illness bad enough to keep her in bed all day, most days. When I'm in bed all day, many days, it's because something is seriously wrong. Same for all the women in my life. So, why is her womanly constitution also her medical diagnosis? Also, why is this still something I'm seeing the medical system do to me and other women in my life? Anyway, then there's Ned, who was so sweet, but also straight up tried to murder his brother. And he just gets funneled into the military by gender and class expectations as like the only option for him to live a life that isn't pointlessly sitting in his brother's shadow. And that almost got him killed. So, not great for him, those expectations, gender, society, class. Then Bella. Why is everyone calling her stupid? Sure, yes, she is naive. She's clearly young, but she is 16. And bonus, those short 16 years were spent isolated in a country home with just her mom, brothers, and cousin. If she lacks common sense, the ability to see through manipulation, or social grace, isn't that a direct result of the adults who are enforcing these systems and this isolation on her? Even indolent Gerald, who arguably has the most privilege in this system, was directly negatively impacted. These systems of class and patriarchy basically made him a placeholder for his deceased father, his mother's marital ambitions, his cousin's romantic interest, his brother's envy, his sister's paternal feelings. He had no motivation, no drive for life, no emotion with which to experience anything beyond a malaise of unending boredom, which was repeatedly his defining characteristic. And don't even get me started on Lucia, who spends the entire book desperately trying to be good for a man that never wanted her. She spends the whole time trying to draw on the lines of a system that says, if you be good and uphold this classist, racist, patriarchal system, that system will reward you, in this case with a handsome man and a lifetime of security. But it doesn't. Not in real life, and not in this story. Which is part of what makes Alcott's book revolutionary. Jean, the one who uses the system as meticulously and harshly as that system ever used her, is the one who ends up with a happy marriage, a doting husband, and the title she always wanted. And that is the point. If the classist, patriarchal, racist system didn't reward women for being good and perpetuating it in 1866, over 150 years ago, it's not going to start now in 2026. While being good can be a great kink if you're into that, it's not how to work with marginalizing systems, because being good is exactly what the system needs you to do to perpetuate. It needs each of us to be quiet, complacent, and believe that if we are the kind of good the system wants, then we will be safe, or loved, or rich, or happy. And as scary as it is to think about, that's just as much of a lie in 2026 as it was in 1866. And if you want more restful space, where we talk about things in their joys and their depths, I'd love to welcome you back for our new book next Thursday. My hope with this channel is to find gems in the public domain that tell incredible stories, written, edited, or translated by women that I, and maybe you, never got to hear. So, if this is your cup of tea, or coffee for some of us, I hope you'll join me for the ride. And if you're enjoying this and want to pass it along to someone else via the algorithm, there are a bunch of buttons. Like, subscribe, share, you know what I'm talking about. Anyway, thank you so much for listening, and I'm excited to read the next one with you, starting next Thursday.